Hello and welcome to everybody. Thank you so much again for joining us in this webinar. We have two very exciting presentations for you today, featuring Isabelle, who is a recent graduate, PhD graduate from the New York University, as well as Muhammad Zia Mehmood, who is a PhD candidate at UC Berkeley. So let me tell you just a little bit about Isabelle before we begin. So Isabelle, as I mentioned, is a recent grad, PhD in economics from New York University. She graduated in May 2022. Her research work focuses on labor markets, marriage, gender inequality, in developing countries. To answer her research questions, Isabelle has designed and implemented field and lab and field experiments in Eastern and Western Africa. And during her PhD, she also worked as a consultant for the World Bank, where she contributed to program evaluations and analytic work on poverty and gender. After her graduation, Isabelle joined Uber, where she continues to design surveys and experiments to answer real-world causal questions. So thank you again, Isabelle, for being with us. I'm going to hand over now to you.
Hello and welcome. This talk is titled Sticky Floors and Female Pioneers. This is joint work with Eyuel Demeke, who is based in Addis, Ethiopia right now. And also want to give a big shout out to our data manager, Emmanuel, who's also joining in right now from Ethiopia and who is a big SurveyCTO fan. And this work was also funded by Petal and JPAL. So around the world, women spend more time on unpaid domestic work than men. And that's also the case in our setting, which is urban Ethiopia, and where the women are microentrepreneurs that are working full time. So in a typical workday, they devote more of their time on housework and childcare than their husbands. And in principle, that is consistent with at least two explanations. On the one hand, women could be relatively better at home production than men, or men could be relatively better at earning money in the labor market. On the other hand, that could also be consistent with what we term gender identity considerations being at play, with housework and childcare being considered the task of a woman. And as such, men have some reluctance in engaging in them, leaving the women attending to them. These gender time constraints emerging from within the household can in turn have labor market implications and result in some of the gender gaps documented in prior work. Given that we all have only 24 hours in the day, with women spending more time on home production, that can reduce their overall time available for market work, but can also potentially restrict at what times they can work in their business and what times they have to be at home. Also to note that there is a gender gap in leisure time, with men spending more time on leisure than women. So there could be some potential for within households time reallocations from male giving up some of the leisure time to take on potentially additional or take on some of the domestic work. So in this project, we are out to answer three main questions. First, whether female microentrepreneurs and their husbands require higher payment to perform an otherwise equal task that's associated with the opposite gender, and we term that requiring a gender premium. And if that's the case, to what extent does this gender premium explain how couples divide their time and certain home production tasks? And we also look at whether there is whether the gender premium of the husband and the wife matter differentially for explaining time use and this division of home production. How do we answer these questions? Our research design has three main components, and I'll explain each component in more detail. We conduct all three components with a sample of couples and administer everything symmetrically but separately with both spouses. So the first component is an elicitation exercise. We elicit in an incentivized manner, the minimum payment that individuals require to perform a certain task as a reservation wage. And we do so for two tasks. a female task and a paired male task, where the emphasis really is on that paired, because we created a task pair in a way that eliminated differences other than gender association and really isolated that gender difference as the key difference. And there was a lot of work going into validating for our local context what are female and male tasks, and doing so in a data-driven way, and really also providing evidence for isolating that gender association as the key difference. And so if an individual requires a higher payment to perform a task of the opposite gender than the own gender, we call that requiring a gender premium. And that's going to be our main explanatory variable in our analysis. In terms of outcomes, we obtain them primarily from a survey that we conduct, again, with both spouses. And the outcomes, our main outcomes of interest are time use and division of home production tasks. And we also recover variables, certain characteristics that allow us to do some heterogeneity analysis later on. The third main component, and that's outside of SurveyCTO, is that we also have a time use app in which individuals enter how to divide their time between paid work, housework, and childcare, time they spend on themselves, and time they spend on sleep in daily frequency throughout the period of the study via this smartphone app that we developed in an as user-friendly way as possible. And the default here is the Ethiopian calendar, time, and also the local language. We do everything, or to answer these questions, we recruit a sample of almost 400 couples in Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia. In these couples, the wife is a female microentrepreneur, which we define as having no more than 4 paid full-time equivalent employees. To put everything a bit more in perspective in terms of timeline and broader context, our data collection is complete. So we've collected, in addition to a screening survey that was preceding everything, we've completed the elicitation exercise, the survey data collection, and the time use data collection. Our analysis is still ongoing, in part because we have this richness of data that we yet have to fully explore and take advantage of. And then in terms of broader context, we've also conducted a sister project on the same sample of couples, where we provide randomized incentives to take on additional market work, and that these offers or these incentives are timed in a way to extend existing working hours. So what did we find so far, with the caveat that this is still ongoing? We find that when husbands require a gender premium, their wives spend more of their workday on housework, and that also translates to the task level, meaning they take on a larger share of housework tasks than their husbands. Possibly because childcare is less considered a woman's task than housework, we do not find that the husband's gender premium is predictive of the time that their wives spend on childcare. And we also find some evidence for asymmetries with only the husband's but not the wife's gender premium being predicted. So to conclude, our findings are more consistent with that notion of internalized gender identity considerations, with men having some aversion to engaging in a woman's task, preventing them from being more involved in housework. So if one wanted to increase that involvement, interventions to shift that perception of housework as a woman's task could be a good avenue. And on our end, in terms of next steps, as I said, the analysis is still ongoing, and there's still a lot of richness in the data that we are yet to explore, and then also turn to our sister project to get a bit more at that point of does that gender premium also have kind of also spill over into the labor market, and assess implications there. And I'm going to stop here, and I look forward to any questions and a discussion
Thank
later.
you. Thank you so much, Isabelle. A lot of really interesting insights. So thanks again, Isabelle. So next on, turn over now to Zia. So Zia is currently a fifth year PhD student at the Haas Business School at the University of California in Berkeley. Before starting his PhD, he completed a master's in public policy from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, and he worked at the Development Impact Evaluation Group, which is called DIME at the World Bank. He studies topics in development economics and political economy, and currently has active research projects in Kenya, Nigeria, India, and Pakistan. So his research interests span questions aimed at strengthening small businesses, particularly those led by women, and improving public health and education delivery in low-income contexts. So thank you, Zia, for joining us. We're excited to hear about your project. I will stop sharing now and hand over to you.
Thank you for the opportunity to share my research. I'm excited to talk about it. The project that I'm going to be talking about in this webinar is one that is still an ongoing thing. So it's about SMS trainings for small businesses in Kenya. So jumping right in, let me start by highlighting how important it is to focus on small businesses. So they form the backbone of the economy for a lot of low-income countries across the world because they employ a large share of the population. They also account for a large chunk of the GDP in emerging economies, and they can also be a crucial vehicle for empowerment of women in these contexts. One major factor that constrains the productivity of small businesses is poor management practices, and we know that there is evidence that shows that there are certain best practices in businesses that are highly correlated with business success. Yet, when we look at the developing world, in a lot of context, most of these practices aren't adopted at all, and that really keeps down business profitability and productivity. Now, business trainings have, these management trainings have been shown to be modestly effective in addressing this constraint on productivity, which is why about $1 billion are spent annually by donors and government organizations to provide these trainings to 4 to 5 million people every year in low-income countries. However, these trainings are classroom-style, in-person trainings that are expensive and also hard to scale and can exclude people who cannot attend, especially, for example, particularly women who have other competing, I would say, competing items that they have to attend to in addition to the business. They're also primarily taking care of the children. So it's hard for them to take out time from their business and their family to go and sit in some classes in person for several hours or even multiple days, right? So a lot of these programs kind of exclude a big chunk of the population, perhaps for which these trainings would even be more beneficial. And the other concern is that in most cases, these trainings are paid for by the donors and governments and provided free of cost to entrepreneurs, which of course means that they require external funding, creating concerns for sustainability of this model of delivery. So in my project, I plan to explore the potential of a possible solution to these concerns of access and sustainability. I study the impact of SMS-based business trainings on business practices and outcomes for MSMEs. These are micro, small, and medium enterprises, and also estimate the willingness to pay for these trainings. I do this by implementing a field experiment with 6,000 Kenyan small business owners, in which I randomize access to SMS-based business trainings across individual business owners, and then I further randomly vary the price of a second module of a training of a willingness to pay for them, right? To get a sense of the feasibility of a market-based approach for delivery. And then I plan to collect data to estimate effects using phone surveys in 3 rounds. The first one, which I'm calling the pre-midline, has already happened. This is 3 months after the intervention. This is like a small-scale pilot type thing. And in this presentation, I will show you some results from some preliminary results from this activity. And but I plan to conduct later on in the year a midline, which is going to be 12 months after the intervention, which is going to be a full sample survey, and then an end line 2 years after the intervention. So where does this fit into the literature? There's ample research actually that shows that business trainings can be modestly effective, but most of these are, again, their classroom. In these studies, the evidence that is for which is assessed, they're mostly classroom-style trainings, in-person, fixed pace for all, and they're expensive and not easily scalable. With the extensive proliferation of cell phones across low-income settings now, there's a growing interest in SMS-based trainings because of their lower costs and scalability. And they can be really crucial for targeting support to women as well, because who are harder to reach and also who face greater challenges. Yet little evidence really documents the effectiveness of an SMS-based training for small businesses. There are some encouraging results from agricultural extension, but nothing really on MSMEs. When it comes to SMS-based trainings, also they're provided free of cost, as I mentioned before, but a market-based approach could be important for scalability, sustainability, and to ensure continued improvements to quality. Yet little to no work exists in this space, except there's this one new study that looks at the willingness to pay for trainings, but these are, again, in-person classroom-style trainings and not remote trainings. So in this study, I addressed this gap by examining the effectiveness of SMS-based trainings, and I explored the feasibility of a market for these trainings via a field experiment. Okay, jumping right into the empirical context. I'm already halfway through my time. So I'm doing this in Kenya. It's a large country in Eastern Africa. 50 million people, 75% of the population is under 35. So it's one of the largest economies in the region. A lot of MSMEs contributing significantly to the GDP and employment. 90% of these are micro enterprises, and just about 55% are owned by women. In terms of business practices, the outlook doesn't look that good. So almost 70% of MSMEs don't maintain any type of business records at all, not even personal notes, right? And less than 10% account for competitor pricing when deciding the prices for their own products. And almost 90% of them have never received any sort of trainings at all, which suggests that this is a good context to really test the effectiveness of SMS-based trainings, because it looks like business practices are very poor in this context. So here are some summary statistics from the sample. Again, this is only for the pre-midline pilot survey that I've already done. So the sample is only 300 observations, average age is 35, education almost 12 years. I'm going to skip over this stuff and get straight into the research design. So the design consists of 2 main components. The first is I randomize 6,000 business owners into one big group of 3,600, which gets the SMS training, and then one group which gets placebo messages, and then comparing outcomes across these is going to give me the effect of the trainings. The training group itself is further divided into 3 further groups, and in these groups, everyone receives the training for free, the first one, but then I offer a second module and I ask for a price, and the price of the second module I randomize. Okay, so for a third of the sample, I ask a price of 20 shillings, which is above the marginal cost of provision for the provider, and then another third receives the price of 5 shillings, which is below the marginal cost of provision, and the third group gets it for free. And comparing out buying decisions across these groups is going to give me whether people are actually willing to pay for something like this, and whether whether the willingness to pay is above the marginal cost of provision, which means that a market of in this space is feasible. So I collect data using phone surveys, and I collect outcomes on knowledge and adoption of best practices, employment outcomes and credit outcomes, and business profitability in 3 rounds. And I'm going to be showing you some preliminary results just from the first one. But before that, a bit about the intervention itself. I partner up with a firm that produces digital content and delivers it through an interactive learning platform, and which is accessible through smartphones as well as dumb phones or feature phones. I focus on just the SMS angle of it because that is, not everyone has smartphones in these contexts, and not everyone has internet, even if they have smartphones. So SMS is something that has the widest reach. So what are the trainings themselves? Well, there's 2 modules with some overlaps, but the core part of them is basically the same. It's essentially, and they encourage best practices which are adapted from management literature with respect to marketing and advertising, record keeping, setting prices, and financial planning. These are just like light touch nudges for people to do some things that the literature shows that is highly correlated with business success. These are interactive, so it's not a one-time information dump. It's actually, you need to keep engaging with the platform by responding over SMS to keep getting more content. And it also has embedded quizzes, which allow me to confirm that there is a comprehension as well. Okay, so the timeline really quick. The intervention went live in December 2021. I did the pre-midline survey in March this year, and I'll be doing the midline with the full sample in later this year, and the end line is scheduled for the end of next year. So with 2 minutes to spare, I guess I'm just gonna go over the summary of the results. One concern I had when I was going into this was that, okay, these are just like SMS messages. Are people really going to engage with them? And it's not, as I said, not one-time information dump. You need to keep engaging with it to keep getting the content. So I was concerned that whether people are going to engage, but it turned out that there is modest engagement. At least 30% of the sample, of the treated sample, actually did engage with at least some of the content. And I found that these trainings improved knowledge and about best practices significantly. Even with a small sample size of 300 observations, there are significant effects here. I'm not going to go into the tables because we're almost out of time. I also find that the trainings improve the adoption of these best practices, and these were driven by mostly along the dimension of advertising. So more and more people started like putting up flyers and doing advertising because of these trainings. I find that there were no effects on new applications to loans, but large and significant positive effects on the size of the loan that people applied for, and also the amount that they received. So they were more successful about it as well. And this was primarily driven by male business owners seeing significantly higher effects. I also find that the training induced a reallocation of effort. So people started spending less time on side jobs and more time on their primary business. And the effect was higher for female business owners. The trainings also significantly increased household income. The effects were significant and also high, and they were stronger for female business owners. And lastly, I find that even though the effects on business sales and profits are not statistically significant, there are still, the coefficients are large and positive. And the lack of significance here can be because of the small sample. It's only 300 observations, and I'm cutting the data in a lot of ways. The objective of this activity was just to see whether whether I can justify going into this with a full sample to evaluate it. And I think all the dimensions I see so far are positive. And so the next steps are really to scale up in the midline survey that is to be conducted in later this year. So I'm excited about that, and also to explore some of the new questions that have arisen here about like why are effects stronger for some, in some cases for men, and why are they stronger for women in others. But that's all I have. Thank you so much for your time.
I just want to say a big thank you to Zia. Thank you to Isabelle in her absence, and to all of you for attending. It's been really great to interact and learn more about these presentations. Thank you, everyone, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.